It's 9 a.m. here in Shanghai, Shenzhen and Hong Kong. You're watching the China Show. I'm Annabelle Drewlers with David Ingles.
We're counting down to the open of Greater China markets. Let's get to your top stories today and an update out of Hong Kong on the big fire. Of course, Hong Kong firefighters are close to completing their search of burnt-out apartment towers after the city's worst disaster in decades claims at least 94 lives.
We have a cautious start for trading in Asia. That's as a sharp rebound in global stocks over the past week begins to stall. Chinese shares in focus after an upgrade from JPMorgan.
Also ahead, an update on China Vanke's debt problems with two big local banks said to have rejected its request for a short-term loan.
And Meituan expected to report its first loss in nearly 3 years. That's as China's food delivery price wars intensify. Hong Kong firefighters say they're close to completing their search of 7 burnt-out apartment towers. That's after fires now known to have killed at least 94 people. Dozens of survivors remain in hospital, with hundreds more left homeless, as a criminal investigation continues into the cause of the disaster. Our China correspondent Min Min Lo joins us now. And Min Min, you're back on the scene for us this morning, and give us an update exactly what's happening there on the ground. It seems like, yes, that fire is now being contained, but what's next exactly?
Yes, I am quite close to the scene of the fire, and actually you can still see a little bit of smoke coming out from one of the buildings, but the fire authorities did say overnight that they would have everything under control by this morning, and by 9 a.m. they would have done forcible entry into every single unit to ensure that there are no residents that are left behind. So yes, the latest death toll stands at 94, unknown number of people that are still missing. As of yesterday morning, it was in the hundreds, and the Hong Kong Chief Executive John Lee was here yesterday, and he said that every family will receive 10,000 Hong Kong dollars in compensation. That is just about $1,300 US, which is quite little considering the enormity of the loss and also considering the high cost of living in Hong Kong. It's probably enough for just a month's rent, but many of these residents have lost everything. I am close to one of the evacuation centers. There are 9 of these shelters nearby, which the government has said will be kept open as long as there are residents that need it. But longer term, they have identified about 1,800 empty apartment units that could serve as transitional housing. But aside from the shelters, there are also some hotels that are participating in providing free rooms for the next 2 weeks just to help some of these residents tide through. But just now I was walking through one of the market centers here, and I did see residents just sleeping on mattresses along the mall corridors and just looking quite dazed, really. I was talking to one man and I was asking him what his plan is, and he said he's hoping to go home tonight, which doesn't seem to be very realistic. And another person told me that she just has no idea. They're just taking it one day at a time, and there are young kids as well. Parents with families sleeping in tents here in the market area.
Min Min, if you could talk a little bit more about relief efforts. I know you mentioned some of the amounts the government has pledged. We've heard and read a lot about how a lot of members in the private sector have responded in what they're pledging and what they're doing. You know, anecdotally, of course, we've all heard about, volunteers, people needing to be turned away, in fact, because of all the efforts and everyone that's showing up there. Give us a sense, really, is there a sense of order that's taking place?
Yes, I was walking through one of the evacuation centers, and I actually did see a sign outside that says they are rejecting further donations. So it seems like they have enough to handle at the moment. They have enough items, and it's very heartening to see over here. I'll show you later on, but there is a distribution center for goods where you can get everything from water and food to your daily necessities, mats, blankets, everything you need to just sleep over comfortably for the night. And it's entirely entirely self-organized. It's not government organized. It's just random sort of volunteers from the residential units nearby that just set everything up here. There's also a medical tent to help those in need as well. And yes, some big companies are donating, including many Chinese tech giants, the likes of Xiaomi, Xpeng, Tencent, all making sizable donations. Of course, the local jockey club as well, making a big donation as well. And also, I should mention, by the way, that the Hong Kong government has set up a 300 million Hong Kong dollar special fund as well to help the victims.
What I find quite sad about all of this as well is that authorities had actually inspected this site several times, and even as recently as last week had warned the contractor about the fire hazard. So what is the latest that we've heard in terms of the investigations that are proceeding?
Yeah, I think this is a sore point for many residents, and one of the most frustrating things to listen to when you are at the press conference yesterday is, yes, they're talking about the financial aid, but there just doesn't seem to be enough focus on the source and the cause of this fire. And the Labour Department said that they did visit the site of the renovation as recently as last week, and they already noticed those substandard materials. So why wasn't there any changes made? You know, who should be accountable for this? Those answers remain unanswered, and there is a task force that has been set up to investigate corruption. So that suggests the authorities perhaps suspect some level of irregularities, whether it's from the contracting process or oversight process. And there are concerns as well because this company, the company in question, already 3 people has been arrested, but that company is still responsible for 11 other residential projects in Hong Kong. And so obviously there is a lot of concern around safety. The Chief Executive John Lee has ordered an inspection of all renovation projects in Hong Kong. He has also said that he wants to phase out bamboo scaffolding in Hong Kong as well. That's a step up from the previous stance back in March when the government said that 50% of public works will need to change their bamboo scaffolding to metal ones. But people are really upset. Some are saying that this is diverting attention from the crux of the issue because they're saying that it's not just the bamboo, it's all the other materials that shouldn't be there, that didn't meet compliance standards, including the green mesh that were not fire resistant, the plastic tarpaulins, the styrofoam, which is extremely flammable. And some are pointing to how, if you can see behind me, you can see the areas where the green mesh is completely burnt off, and yet you still see the bamboo scaffolding intact. And people are pointing to that as a reason to say that it's not the bamboo that's the culprit. And there are some Hong Kong residents that are very saddened that this intangible heritage that Hong Kong has is going to be lost, and it's not necessarily the real crux of the matter here.
Min, thank you. Min Lo there, our China correspondent. Back on site there. Right. Coming up here on shows, we'll get into the thick of things here. We're joined by Hong Kong LegCo member Regina will be joining us in a couple of minutes to take us through, of course, what she makes of the government response so far and what really to expect in terms of changes ahead, as, of course, the disaster is spurring calls for change around the city's housing regulations. This is The China Show. Right. Just looking at markets, it's generally been a quiet last few days. Obviously, the holiday in the U.S. Commentary, though, coming through out of Goldman, just the expectation or the likelihood of a broadening out of the rally beyond the U.S. markets. And certainly the other part to that conversation is within the U.S. markets. We've seen a rethinking and, of course, how the AI play has changed. Alphabet, of course, has come back in a very big way along that conversation. A50 futures are pointing to some gains. Just to mention, too, Meituan is coming out with earnings today, something to watch going into the session. Special spotlight on Korea today, and you'll see why very, very shortly. The Kospi is going the opposite way of the Kosdaq, which is going completely the opposite way, and then some more on the back of, let's just put it, efforts and incentives to encourage retail investors there. We're up 3% on that. Dollar Korea on the back of, I think we're 24 hours from the BOK decision on the stronger side, so we are weaker on the won. And speaking of currencies, dollar China 707, nothing much here. The 10-year yield, we are on track. I think it's for 2 weeks of fairly strong gains on the Treasury space, really on the back of the repricing around the Fed come December.
Yeah, absolutely. We've now got odds of up to 90%. So that decision is not looking quite as live as it was just a couple of weeks ago. But in terms of what we're watching in Greater China ahead of the Open, well, you mentioned that yuan level you're seeing there. Of course, that big watch. Can we hit back down to that 7 mark? In terms of the sectors in focus, most definitely we're going to be keeping a very close watch on China Vanke. As you said, that big headline yesterday was that their loan request looks to have been rejected by at least 2 banks. So, of course, in terms of the sectors, the financial, but also the property one to watch. Earnings and company specific, you mentioned Meituan, really can't go past those numbers today because we already had Alibaba, JD reporting as well. That big sense of how acute is the food price delivery war looking in China. We are expecting the first loss for Meituan going back to 2022. Macau occupancy rate for the hotels, we'll be watching those numbers when they drop later this afternoon. We did last see it sitting around 85%, but of course that's a holiday season. And overnight HIBOR as well, you're also watching that one.
Yeah, so might be month ends, might have to do with other factors, but it was quite a spike in HIBOR yesterday. I think it was the biggest single-day jump on a net basis going back to, I think, 2023, late 2023. Let's get a sense of markets right now, where we are. It's been generally a stable week across equity markets the last 48 hours or so. Not a lot of price action, not a lot of volume, too. Joining us here on set, Jason Lui, head of APAC Equity and Derivative Strategy at BNP Paribas. Good morning. Nice to see you.
Thanks for having me.
What's top of mind for you this week?
I think there are a couple of things we can highlight. You mentioning earlier the segment about the rally broadening out beyond the U.S. I think in this part of the world, I think certainly we are looking closely at China and Japan. If we look at China, for example, from an economic standpoint, the data has been decelerating over the past few months. Now, the good news is that we have a strong foundation of the first half. So if the government continue to provide targeted measure, it is still possible to meet that annual target, which was reiterated at the fourth plenum. And so, which is why we've seen recently, you're starting to hear a little bit more announcement coming out. So, for example, 2 days ago, you have this joint announcement from a variety of ministry trying to boost the consumption.
Yes.
And when you look at the measures, it is still relatively targeted. I think at this moment, the Chinese policymakers are not necessarily willing to go for these big bang stimulus yet because they still want to observe how the other part of the economy are recovering. And out of those policies, I think one that we are watching closely is that if you look at this year, one of the most successful policy has been the consumer trading program, where a lot of the local consumer are willing to buy some new electronic products or EVs. So that program is getting close towards the end of this year, and whether or not that will be renewed, and more importantly, whether or not the scope will be expanded, can also give us some guidance about what the trajectory could be for next year. And I think we may get some hint of that with the Central Economic Work Conference that will be happening in the next 1 or 2 weeks. Yeah,
that could be the next catalyst. What do you think the market reaction could be on the subsidy if, in fact, that is, let's put it, discontinued?
Yeah, I think at this point, our base case is that given the success of these trading program and that immediate boost to spending, it is likely that the policymaker will consider extending it. I think the question mark is the scope and the items that are eligible, because they have been tinkering with the scope depending on the regional versus the central subsidies. So I think certainly that's something we are monitoring closely.
With this conference as well, we're going to get the policy priorities for next year, and we could get some more updates on their ambitions around tech and maybe the infrastructure build out to support that. What are you anticipating there, and also how does it sort of feed into that bigger focus we see now on valuations and ROI?
Yeah. I think we probably got a hint of that from the fourth plenum when they announced this blueprint for the next 5-year plan. So I think a lot of that focus will be a continuation of we have seen for the better part of the last 2 years. I think tech and self-sufficiency will still be a very high priority. But so far, when we look at some of the earnings from the Chinese tech company recently, I think they have been quite disciplined in terms of their vision about the tech spending, and that is quite different than some of the commentary we're hearing from the U.S. So I think inherently you are seeing on the private sector that they are taking a slightly different approach. But of course, that will have an implication on the equity market, because previously I think investors were hoping for more upbeat or more ambitious guidance coming from some of these companies. So for the past month or two, you notice that the Hong Kong, China space, especially tech-related names, may be a little bit under pressure, while the North Asia market, like Japan, Korea, Taiwan, seems to be taking the lead.
And do you see that becoming maybe a little bit more acute going into next year? Because I think to your point around spending, I mean, you're not seeing, again, it's a sort of a similar story across China and ex-China as around perhaps low ROI compared to CapEx spend. But if you look at the CapEx spend of a company like Alibaba, for instance, even in the low billions on a quarterly basis versus you get the tens of billions for the likes of OpenAI or Oracle, etc., how much more does that become sort of the narrative for 2026, do you think?
Yeah, I think for 2026, there will definitely be a lot more focus on the sustainability of those type of spending. What we have noticed so far, at least based on the earnings conference call and the earnings result, the Chinese tech companies seems to be quite focused on that early stage adoption and monetization, which is when we look at some of the American peers, perhaps they're still focusing more on having the best frontier model. And depending on your business model, maybe one is better to monetize that than the other. And to your point about kind of broadening out or that divergence, this is certainly our view as well. So when we look at AI investment in Asia as a whole, when we look at like a market level, it is actually quite interesting because each market offers something slightly different. In Japan, for example, they're mostly equipment makers that are more sensitive to future contracts. If you look at markets like Korea and Taiwan, there are foundries, memory chips maker that actually benefit from both future contract and the immediate price jump. So that recent jump in memory price is actually gives you an immediate boost to earnings, which is quite different than perhaps what you may see in markets like Japan as a whole.
Should we start to distinguish between, I guess just to get more granular in that, between Korea and Taiwan? Because recently we've seen in Korea a rotation there. Taiwan has been almost, I wouldn't say sold off, but it's certainly underperformed quite clearly its peer in Korea.
Yeah, I think the kind of rotation, I will probably bring in Japan as well, because what we've noticed is that when you look at the supply chain on the AI side, these three markets are highly integrated and they kind of take different responsibility around that chain. And of course, in Japan, you have that one company that are very, very involved in the entire AI investment cycle as well. So what we have noticed is that within Korea and Taiwan, Korea, for example, there's a lot of intra-rotation. So switching from a memory company to another memory company. Yeah. Whereas for Taiwan, what we have noticed is that from a foreign flow perspective, the kind of de-risking actually happened earlier. So we actually have seen foreign investors taking profit on the foundry stocks as early as October. Whereas a lot of the move in Japan actually happened quite recently, especially since the early November. So I think our feeling is that as investors continue to evaluate which part of that AI ecosystem they want to concentrate their investment in, that naturally leads into a lot more rotation for those three markets.
Moving beyond tech, because we have had a couple of guests this week, and I think Morgan Stanley, for instance, is one of those that's looking for next year. The US economy has held up maybe better than expected. That could set the stage for the economy also to improve in Asia next year and broaden beyond tech exports. Is there any particular sector that you're watching beyond the tech story?
Sure. I think the major one will certainly be the consumption side of things in China, because this year, while the broader market has done quite well, if you look at the drivers of this rally, it has been a lot of high dividend yielding stocks, and there's been a lot of the tech stocks, especially when it comes to the Hong Kong market.
Barbell strategy.
Exactly, which is something that we have been kind of advocating as well. But when you look at the consumption side, which is the core of that growth driver, it still remains a little bit uncertain, which goes back to our earlier point about the broadening out of that consumer subsidies, whether or not it can stimulate and create a positive feedback loop. I think this is one area that for next year is certainly something that we're watching closely. And to your point about U.S., it's also interesting that you mentioned it as well, right? That expectation of the Fed swing around so fast that it's almost like we've gone through the entire full circle in about 3 weeks or so.
Yeah.
So I think investors will continue to monitor, because depending on the tone of Chair Powell in the upcoming meeting, perhaps they may reset their expectation as well. And on top of that, President Trump is expected to make an announcement of the new Fed chair. So there could be some kind of an interaction in terms of what the current chair is planning versus what the market would like to anticipate for the next year.
You know, that's interesting. The fact that we almost went full circle on the Fed conversation, right? We went from a hold, the only thing that was lacking were priced for a hike, in fact. So on that very note, so I have two-part question for you. So Bitcoin as a proxy collapsed to about 80,000. We're back about 90,000. People pointed to that and said, hey, there's underlying market mechanics don't seem to be conducive to risk. Liquidity issues. What do you think the liquidity conditions will be? next year as far as market assumptions? Because that seems to be like the base of this recipe.
Yeah. I think your point about liquidity is very important because we actually have heard various Fed officials also commenting on some of the underlying mechanics regarding the liquidity. I think our view is that there will be some kind of balance sheet adjustment in the U.S. in order to provide that kind of stopgap solution for this liquidity situation. But more importantly, I think for the equity market, it's more about the expectation of the new Fed chair and how he or she will try to work together with the rest of the board to implement some of those rate cut expectations that the market is currently thinking.
Jason, thanks for joining us this morning. That was Jason Lui, the head of APAC Equity and Derivatives Strategy at BNP Paribas. And leaving you here with a look at how Hong Kong markets are shaping up into the session this morning. You've got the Yuan reference rate as well there at the bottom of your screen. But watching the Yuan, of course, and watching as well equities, although we do have that Thanksgiving holiday, liquidity overall is going to be probably pretty thin. We'll have more ahead. This is Bloomberg.
This one actually just crossing, so this is let's call it the daily fix. Well, the latest update was as of about 10 minutes or so back, the repo rate. This is the overnight level, right? Most side, as you can see, it's now fallen to just below 1.3, which effectively puts it now at the lowest in about 2 years or so. We'll track this. The opposite, of course, at least on a principal basis, was HIBOR in Hong Kong. We can get to that later because we did see a big spike on that specific one. Equity markets are called higher going into the open today.
Yeah, that's right. We're going to see, I would still say we'll see some thin trading just based off the fact we're coming off the Thanksgiving holiday in the US. So you expect sort of lower trading volumes across Asia in the session today with people taking advantage of that possible long weekend. But still, you are just seeing some modest upside here this morning. Some of the specific sectors we're going to be watching rather. China gaming is going to be a watch for us because we did see China approving 6 imported online games over November. So that was 178 domestic online games as well, so an increase from the month prior. China Vanke shares, given we saw that huge slump in the session yesterday, and we continue to have more reporting around their loan request. The latest on that is that it's been rejected by at least 2 Chinese banks. It is trying to secure a short-term loan, but certainly these default fears for the company continue to build. So that one is very much a watch, and also keeping an eye on Taiping Insurance. This is a name that's exposed to the Hong Kong fire situation. We did see that name dropping again in the session on Thursday, but we are, of course, continuing to monitor the continued fire efforts. We have essentially rescue efforts ongoing in that. More ahead.
You're watching the China Show, and yeah, we are just going into the Friday session here, 40 seconds away. Lots to talk to you about as it pertains to economics and markets, but there's just really one thing in my mind specifically. It's been a terrible week here in Hong Kong. We'll get to the latest, of course, and what's going on in Taipo. Of course, Min Min Law, China correspondent, is there on the ground. We're almost 48 hours from the initial reports, of course, of the fire mid-afternoon on Wednesday. The death toll has gone up. We've seen, of course, we've heard from John Lee, of course, overnight. We've heard from fire officials. Investigations are ongoing. Relief efforts, support measures. The public and the private sector have all responded to this quite rapidly. But yes, we're going to be here not just over the weekend. We're going to be here for weeks, if not months.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely those investigations, as you said, ongoing and trying to understand exactly what sparked the initial blaze. But let's take a look at what's happening with markets also coming online this morning, because we are just seeing them a little steady, which you, again, might expect. As we were mentioning, it is the Thanksgiving holiday in the US. That does have a big bearing on liquidity in this region as well. But there has been a call this morning that's getting quite a lot of views, and that's JPMorgan turning more bullish on Chinese equities. They've actually shifted their recommendation to overweight, and they're looking at the prospect of large gains for next year, and that does actually outweigh any risk that they see for losses as well. But they're looking at factors like AI adoption, consumption measures, governance reforms. These are all different reasons they're saying that could actually lead to another leg higher. So that's the mainland market as we come on today. Let's take a look at what's happening in Hong Kong as well. Given that there's going to be a couple of different stocks we're going to track very closely. There's one in particular, of course, and that is Meituan that's set to report its results later today. We could actually end up seeing the first loss for the business going back to 2022, and that is as we see very intense price competition between Meituan, Alibaba and also JD. Alibaba, another name to watch because we actually did just see them releasing overnight but their first self-developed AI glasses. So it is an interesting move for the company going into wearables, and I think it points back to that bigger question around monetization of AI, and this is clearly a new direction or a new theme for Alibaba and where they're taking this as well.
Right. Let's get back to our top story. Here in Hong Kong, firefighters say they are close to completing their search of 7 burnt-out apartment towers as a criminal investigation continues into the cause of the disaster. Min Min Lo is on the ground for us. He's back on site. Min Min, a lot of focus on the bamboo scaffolding. What can you tell us about where that conversation is as we speak?
Yeah, it's a controversial issue because Hong Kong Chief Executive John Lee has said Hong Kong will now start to phase out bamboo scaffolding. It's now being blamed as the main culprit of this fire because obviously the scaffolding caught fire first. The authorities said that the spread of the fire was very unusual, especially with the green mesh as well. They also found flammable materials like styrofoam boards covering the windows, tarpaulin sheets, and these are things that shouldn't be there, and they found them on many floors, and so they were non-compliant materials, and that's why a criminal investigation is ongoing with that engineering company, and 3 men has already been arrested. So this is a public safety issue. It's an issue of corporate negligence, also potentially government negligence, because the Labour Department did investigate and visited the site as recently as a week ago and already found the problems there, and yet nothing seems to have been done to prevent this tragedy. And it's also a political problem because we are close to the Legislative Council elections. Campaigning has been suspended. John Lee said he will decide whether or not to postpone the elections, but certainly the way the government handles this tragedy is going to shape people's perception of the Hong Kong government. Beijing certainly will be watching very closely. John Lee made a point last night at the press conference early on in his remarks to thank President Xi and Beijing, thanking them for dispatching the rescue task force from China's Hong Kong office as well. And of course, the election now is quite different from what it was a few years ago, right? Because of the national security law, the pro-democracy voices have been silenced. And even without this fire, that sky-high property prices have long been a source of discontent for many citizens.
Min Min, thank you for the update. Min Min Lo there on site for us. Flags in Hong Kong are now at half-mast. We did also hear from the chief executive that all government-led celebratory events will be put off for some time. And yes, civil servants, and we've talked about the private sector, have been also mobilized, of course, in terms of the relief efforts underway. Joining us here on set, Hong Kong LegCo Council member Regina Ip, who chairs the New People's Party, is here with us to, under very unfortunate circumstances, of course. It's been a very terrible and trying week here for Hong Kong. Just give us a sense, Regina, of what your conversations have been with your peers.
Well, my colleagues have been working very hard in the affected area to help the victims, providing blankets, face masks, diapers, and all sorts of things they need, and it's all very sad. I think now more questions are being raised whether we should continue to allow bamboo scaffoldings to be used for such massive operations, It has been pointed out before that bamboo scaffolding should only be used for smaller scale renovation, not for renovation of such a large scale project encompassing 8 blocks of housing estates. And also, actual Wang Fuk Court in Tai Po is not new to controversy. There have been arguments between the owners about awarding of the contracts, renovation contracts, which cost Hong Kong dollar 350 million, which is above average, And that's why the former owners corporation were voted out last September and replaced by a new owners corporation with the responsibility to supervise the works. But actually all these owners, they are unpaid volunteers, They might have been affected themselves. So the question is, with such a multi-story building management, can you really rely on owners working as unpaid volunteers to supervise the works? So I think the government need to do more to help the residents. And as your people reported, Labour Department already found some of the materials were not compliant with government standards. And it is really sad that the bamboo scaffolding coupled with the non-fire retardant mesh netting and the dry weather and the windy weather caused the fire to spread so quickly and led to such colossal loss of life and property. It's really sad.
Yeah, we should reiterate as well that the investigations into the construction company that you mentioned are ongoing, and obviously we haven't got to the exact bottom of what went wrong, and also this question over which materials were used and whether they were contravening safety standards. But Regina, I mean, you are someone, as a former Secretary for Security, have been in this government position before that Chris Tung now finds himself in today. Do you think that there needs to be any government officials that are also held accountable for what's happened?
I think, again, it's premature to pass judgment on any officials or even on any companies involved. But I think government should take a good look at our existing legislation, whether there are gaps in the requirements about fire retardant materials, not only for construction but also for smaller scale renovations, and to step up the enforcement. I think this should be part of the overall review and investigation to be conducted by government.
What about potential changes to things like the awarding of contracts, for example? Is that something that you think LegCo should be looking at as well? And should we expect changes there?
There have always been complaints about awarding of contracts because there's a lot of competition for these lucrative works, So the Urban Renewal Authority already providing a service to the owners. They can contract the URA and they will help you assess the value of the contract when you do the tendering. I think this has been done in many instances, but still it's a hot area of contention between owners and between competitors for the jobs.
The Hong Kong Chief Executive John Lee visited the site yesterday, and he did announce that $10,000 Hong Kong dollars, that's around $1,300 US, will be handed out to each family that's been affected. Do you think that's sufficient?
That's just immediate relief, clearly insufficient. These people have lost their homes and properties, and some of them will move to a hotel soon. But currently, the government is offering accommodation in transitional housing, temporary housing in faraway areas, far away from their homes. So they have a lot of adjustment to do, whether for work or for schooling for the children. So the government set up a fund, fundraising. The government contributed 300 million Hong Kong dollars toward a fund for long-term relief for the Wang Fuk Court residents. And I think the latest is we already received 800 million Hong Kong dollars donations from the community. I think more money will be flooding in, including from American corporations and the American Chamber, for which we are grateful.
Yeah, we've seen really an outpouring of support in kind as well, to your point there. You're very familiar with how the system works in Hong Kong. We've heard a lot of, let's call it, strong language from the chief executive overnight, a further review of one issue is the scaffolding, of course. Are there specific changes that you think we should expect, and when do you think those changes are?
I always think that the multi-story building management is a big problem. The government has already updated the law, but the fact remains, if you rely on owners, like myself, I'm an owner. In fact, in many buildings, nobody wants to sit on the owner's corporation. It's a thankless job, and they are unpaid volunteers, and they really need more help from government, expert advice as well as help in mediation in case of disputes, and and more help from ICAC to deal with possible corruption. I think the ICAC ought to get more deeply involved, because with these large-scale housing projects, a lot of money is involved in each renovation project.
How, and I think to Bill's point, investigations are still ongoing, but how cognizant is LegCo over potential loopholes that could allow for corruption to result in contracts being far beyond the monetary value? And do you think government regulation to aid owners associations could address that issue?
Many LegCo members who have done district work for a long time are well aware of these building management problems and the squabbles between residents. But the awarding of contracts, after all, have to be decided by the owners' corporation.
That's right.
And from time to time, in more than one case, there have been arguments between different owners. And this is something maybe the Home Affairs Bureau need to step in a bit more.
In terms of, just to address also the firefighting ability, and anyone who has visited Hong Kong, who's seen Hong Kong on television or in other media, we live in skyscrapers all around, and one can't help but think, if and when something like what happened this week happens, the ability for firefighters to be able to address not just a skyscraper on fire, but several at that. Does technology have a role in being able to equip the firefighters to be able to address this if and when it happens, and hopefully never again?
Well, I think there are arrangements between Hong Kong and other cities in the Greater Bay Area to share the resources and the technology. And I know Guangzhou and Shenzhen are ready to help, but the space is so limited. Hong Kong is so congested. Very large appliances would have difficulty maneuvering around the buildings, And I noticed that our compatriots on the Chinese mainland have queried why we have not used drones,
Yes.
And I understand that 8 drones have been loaned to us, but they are more for monitoring the heat level rather than for spraying water. And there must be good technical reasons for that, But you see, Hong Kong is so crowded. These 8 blocks are very close to each other, and the units are small, and the layout is complex. And I heard from the deputy fire chief that his firemen actually had to really climb floor by floor, fight their way up to break into each home to save the residents. And they've done an amazing job. All of them owe a big tribute to the firemen for their big sacrifice, particularly to the family of the one, Mr. Ho, who lost his life.
Yeah, the most densely populated city in the world. We're days away now, though, from the heavily promoted legislative elections.
Yes.
Do you think that there's case for those to be postponed? Is that the appropriate response, do you think?
I think there are legal limitations, both from local law and the basic law. I'm sure it's under consideration by the government, and we are waiting to hear from the government. Currently, all political parties have suspended our campaigning activities, and our people are on the ground to help the victims.
Regina, thank you for joining us this morning. Of course, a very solemn occasion, but we do appreciate you making the time for us as we continue to really assess the impact of the worst fire that Hong Kong has seen in decades. But that was Regina Ip there, the Hong Kong Legislative Council member and New People's Party chair as well. We'll have more on the fire in Hong Kong coming up. On Insight, we'll be speaking to engineering experts. That's as the city moves to end the use of traditional bamboo scaffolding. More ahead. This is Bloomberg. Bloomberg's learned that at least 2 major local banks rejected China Vanke's recent attempt to secure a short-term loan. For the latest now on that story and the broader property woes that we see as well in mainland China, let's bring in our team. We've got our China credit reporter Trista Xinyi joining us, along with our Bloomberg Intelligence Chief Asia Credit Strategist Timothy Tan, also in the studio here this morning. But Trista, we can get started with you because this was great reporting yesterday, and of course a really big story to be following as well. But why exactly have we got these rejections?
Yeah, so Vanke tried to secure the short-term loan from banks in mainland China, but they got rejected. And that short-term loan is actually they're planning to, help them to repay the 2 bonds coming mature next month. And that 2 bonds was in total of, more than 5 billion yuan. And then later, after they got the rejection, and later on late Wednesday night, we see they sent a filing on mainland saying that they're seeking, to delay the yuan payment, which shocked the investor a lot. As we can see yesterday, the bond price, no matter onshore and offshore, drop a lot, and also equity drop a lot as well. So I think the rejection actually underscored the waning support the government or the biggest shareholder can get for the Vanke moving forward, right? So because for such a long time, we always see Vanke is still a really strong developer who has not been defaulted yet. And for a long time, investors still have some kind of more comfortable on this name. But right now, it's actually the shift about, how investors are seeing Vanke moving forward.
In the event that the company does fail to refinance, what will be the broader implications based on the people that you've spoken to this week?
Yeah, of course, people are actually, trying to see whether there will actually a restructuring coming in for Vanke, right? And then more broadly speaking, I think if Vanke going to default or restructuring, definitely, undermine the overall confidence on this whole sector. And we're already almost the 5th year of the whole property crisis, and people will start wondering, where's the end of this? And then what's going to happen after Vanke default? And yeah.
We'll bring you in, Tim. What's your reaction to how this has been playing out, but also the broader implications?
Well, let's put it this way. Delaying payment is probably expected. Vanke doesn't have a leverage problem. It has a liquidity problem because property sales have not been catching up fast enough to be able to then completely repay their bonds. No, I mean, come on. If you cut off financing, real estate companies naturally die. Now, the question is, can you refinance? In the past, the central government has been supporting it significantly, and they have been able to refinance most of their bonds until now. Now, the question everybody is asking is not so much whether Vanke can refinance, is whether the central government will continue to support the company. Correct? Now, if the central government says, okay, fine, the banks don't lend, we will inject more shareholder loans. It's possible, all right? Maybe not immediately. That's why they're asking for a delay of the bonds. Or they'll go to the bondholder and say, hey, come on, why don't you extend for another year? We'll pay you extra money. This has been done so often already. It should not be a surprise to anybody that this happens. But in the dollar bond market, well, you are looking at offshore bonds. Offshore bonds have been trading at 35 cents anyway. Whether it's 35 cents or 25 cents, it's not a reflection of whether Vanke will survive. It's whether what your recovery value is. That's a different story. Right? But onshore bonds remains, at this point, around 70 cents. It was at 90 cents. They dropped 20 cents, reflecting this risk. Now, obviously, restructuring, I think, is a given at some point. Okay? Not the kind of restructuring you see in Country Garden or, for that matter, Evergrande or any other much more highly levered ones, but more a redistribution of maturities along those lines.
Why not? Why not of that kind?
Because
what makes
the
this one
leverage is
different?
not high.
Okay.
We're not talking about a company that has 6 times leverage or 5 times leverage. We're talking about less than 1. So technically speaking, if you're looking at the balance sheet, the company is okay from a leverage perspective.
Right.
But they are meeting liquidity issues because the market refinancing mechanism has shut off. That's a different story.
And is that the reason why spreads broadly have not blown out?
Yeah, I mean, in what sense? The onshore ones, at least for the bonds, it has blown out. But for the broader market, we are already past the point of looking at, oh, is this guy going to default? No, we are looking at where is the recovery going to be, when it is going to be. So you're going to, because most of the big companies have already restructured, correct? You got recently, Country Garden was the latest one. Okay, Shimao has already completely issued new convertible bonds to restructure the whole maturity system. So now it's not a question of, okay, are they going to default on new bonds? It's when is the recovery going to come? When I'm going to get my money back over time.
Just broadly, the conversation from a liquidity issue to a solvency issue can happen quite quickly.
Yes.
In terms of the company's sales, if that dries up, does it become a solvency issue?
Yeah, well, yes. Obviously, if it completely dries up, it will be a solvency issue. But that's not the case.
Okay.
It's just slow sales. Okay, and also because even if you have slow sales, companies require refinancing if you are, let's say, for real estate or any high capital utilization industry, right? You cut off the liquidity, all companies will face liquidity issues.
Tim, thank you so much. Timothy Tan, Trista Law there on the latest with Vanke and the broader implications potentially. This is The China Show. Right, just a look at some of the movers we're tracking going into, 30 minutes into the cash market session. PopMart, note out of MS here, good entry point when you look at it. We had a big move already in the stock this week, a further move as you can see here on your screens. We're also looking at leaning in other stocks as well. We'll get into most of these things. The second hour of The China Show is just ahead.
You're watching The China Show this morning and bringing you the latest on the situation in Hong Kong, where firefighters say they're close to completing their search of 7 burnt-out apartment towers. That's after fires there killed at least 94 people.
Yes, and we are expecting to get more updates throughout the day. We are almost about, let's call it 48 hours from the initial reports of that fire. We've had and seen and heard an outpouring of support. Pledges of financial supports and in kind as well, and to the extent, and we'll get really a sense of how this is shaping up on the ground in a moment, to the extent that some volunteers have had to be turned back just because of the initial response coming through from the private sector as well. When you look at what's taking place, of course, in Taipo. That is also to say there's a separate conversation and investigation taking place into what happened, whether or not, of course, that was down to the contractor and the engineering company. We've had a conversation earlier here, of course, with Regina Ip, who joined us here earlier on, that there needs to be, that they are planning to look at things like the awarding of contracts. And there has to be a more structural conversation there that then led to everything else that took place. And of course, as we wrap up, quite a tragic week here.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, those investigations ongoing. And one of the I think, more tragic points of this is that authorities actually had inspected that site several times and warned about the fire risk as recently as last week. So clearly those investigations ongoing. But let's bring in our China correspondent, Min Min Lo, who joins us now from an evacuation centre in Hong Kong. And Min Min, share with us exactly what's happening there with you.
Yes, I'm close to an official evacuation center nearby, but this area is actually entirely self-organized. You can see behind me there are these comforters, blankets, sheets, tents, sleeping bags, pillows, just everything you need to make you feel comfortable just for the night. It's entirely self-organized by residents in the area, just random people coming up to provide donations and people volunteering to organize. Many of them are students, some of them freelancers, and they take the time off to help out here. Here you can see shampoos, towels, there are disposable underwears, there are medical stuff, I saw patches that treat fever. It's very busy here. We are just about 1 or 2 streets away from the actual scene of the fire, so as close as we can get, and that's where a lot of residents, just inside the market center over there, overnight there were people sleeping there with the mattresses that they got here. I mean, it's very chilly outside to spend the night, so they were just sleeping in the corridors. Unfortunately, I saw some scuffles broken out just now because there were some people that I think the volunteers suspect they were not victims of the fire, but they were perhaps just trying to get some free stuff, and a bit of a small fight broke out earlier. And over there you can see the triage center. There is a medical tent just to give support for small, long-term perennial sort of injuries that people have. Any serious sort of burn issues, those will be sent to the hospital. But you can see that it's pretty well supported, and it's really encouraging to see that so many residents just came out to provide their support. And actually at the evacuation center, I saw a sign that says that they are not accepting any more donations. So it seems like they are well supported right now.
Yeah, maybe I was actually going to ask you that at this point. Do you get a sense of what exactly is still needed? Because we are getting a lot of reports, anecdotal, and we are hearing, in fact, also from some of these statements coming out that, you know, to stop them from coming at this point in time. We're okay for now, but this is not going to be an overnight thing. It won't be over the weekend. It won't be even, you know, over the next few weeks. You know, a lot of the residents will be in a separate place, let's put it that way, for months. And I want to get a sense of what exactly is needed. And is there some sort of strategy to spread out the support just to ensure that things are adequate today, but they remain adequate well into after a few weeks' time, Min Min?
You know, when I speak to the volunteers here, they said it was completely, it just sprung up from the residents, you know, the community here, and they have no idea what's going to happen next because people just came together, they found an empty space here, they set things up, and things just gathered steam, and they were like, oh, we don't actually know if we would be chased out. It just sort of came together in a very impromptu way. They don't know how long it will be here. It may be a couple of days, maybe longer, depending on whether there are still residents sort of milling around trying to find a place to sleep or whether they will eventually be relocated somewhere else. So everything is just very organic and nobody has any answers to tell me here. So it's just kind of springing up as we go, and longer term the government has said they have identified about 1,800 apartment units throughout Hong Kong that could serve as transitional housing for the people affected. That is roughly equivalent to the total housing stock that was affected by the fire. So that's going to be the long-term plan. The interim plan, there are 9 shelters, most of them community centers that the government is keeping open as long as there are residents who need it. And of course, there are hotels participating as well in this effort, offering free rooms for up to 2 weeks while these residents find their footing.
What do we know about the government investigations and where they stand into what exactly sparked this fire in the first place and the overall handling of it as well?
Yes, I mean, I think one of the most remarkable things is that the government really moved very swiftly to arrest the 3 people from the engineering company that they accuse of manslaughter and gross negligence. And they have acknowledged that the speed of the fire was unusual. They found substandard materials. They said, you know, the green mesh surrounding the buildings shouldn't have burnt as fast as it did. And they found flammable materials like the styrofoam boards covering the windows on many floors. They found those plastic waterproof tarpaulin sheets that shouldn't be there as well. And the question is whether it's just the fault of the engineering company or is there some sort of corruption, some sort of negligence among the public bureaus as well, because the Department of Labour already inspected the site. As recently as a week ago, they knew of the issues, and yet it doesn't seem like anything was done to prevent this fire. So is there some sort of, you know, perhaps the Department of Labour needs to take some accountability here, but we're not sure because at the press briefing yesterday, reporters were asking if some officials need to step down because of this, and the spokesperson sort of sidestepped that question and said that, you know, investigations are ongoing. They have set up a task force though to look into potential corruption, especially into the oversight as well as the contracting process here.
That was our China correspondent Min Min Lo there on the ground for us, just very close to the site of where that fire broke out in Tai Po. And I think it's of course going to be a big question as to how this plays into these local elections that are coming up, because the government's been heavily promoting these. They are due to take place really just days away. It's that question as well that's already been posed to government officials. Should they be looking to postpone them instead? And the chief executive, John Lee's already said that they may make that decision again just in the next few days as well. But we did speak to the Hong Kong Legislative Council member Regina about this very question, and again the impact that this inferno could have as locals head to the polls.
I think there are legal limitations, both from local law and the basic law. I'm sure it's under consideration by the government, and we are waiting to hear from the government. Currently, all political parties have suspended our campaigning activities, and our people are on the ground to help the victims.
And we have seen an outpouring of support, and Min Min just really gave us a snapshot what it is specifically there and where she is right now towards the survivors of the fire. Donations have been stacking up, individuals, businesses. For more on this part of the story, Shirley Zhao is with us here on set to just help us understand the response. Let's start with the government response. We did hear, of course, from John Lee yesterday. Just give us a sense of what that's like.
Yeah, so on the political side, of course, we've got all these investigations going on into potential corruption and going to the roots of the potential cause of the issue and the safety issue of Hong Kong's construction process. On the financial side, the Hong Kong Insurance Authority has urged insurance companies to provide, timely support for those who are making inquiries and claims, and Hong Kong's Monetary Authority is also asking banks to provide support to those who need financial assistance or any other sort of assistance on this front.
You can see here just that in terms of the vision, that direct outpouring of support we've seen from residents that are very close to this site. As Min Min was just saying earlier, what we're seeing here is just a couple of streets away from the building site in Tai Po itself, and you have seen that direct pouring of support from residents. But what about residents that are supporting in different ways? For instance, we were talking earlier about blood donations, other different ways that people are looking to lend a hand. What have we got on that front?
Yeah, across the city, a lot of residents are donating all sorts of things, supplies, including food, water, clothing, and blood. And some of the donations have accumulated so much that organizations setting up, donation points across the city are actually asking people to stop donating. And on the, private business sector, a lot of major and small businesses are also making donations, and we've seen, the four biggest Hong Kong tycoon families, including Chang Gong's Li Ka-shing family, the Henderson's Lee family, San Hong Gai's Guok family, and New World's Zhang family, donating money and other sort of support. And combined, I think Hong Kong's business sector has donated over 100 million Hong Kong dollars for this accident.
Just anecdotal to this. I mean, this time yesterday, as we were wrapping up the show, right after the show, a few of us went, in fact, down to the Central Blood Donation Center, and the line was out the building. So we couldn't even, we were able to get in the door, but that's as far as you could go. And the slots were filled up yesterday and also today, which really shows you how quickly people act and mobilize here in the city. There's also been, parallel to this, a series of events that have been private sector events that have been canceled. What do we know about that? Because we know the government has also said, as far as the public sector, celebratory events are concerned, that's been put on ice for now.
Yeah. So, as you said, a series of events, big and small, have been canceled. Some of the most high-profile ones, including, the Trail Walker, which is one of the biggest fundraising sporting events in Hong Kong, organized by Oxfam Hong Kong, and it was originally set to take place around this weekend, and it has been cancelled. And Cyclothon, organized by the Hong Kong Tourism Board, sponsored by San Hong Gai, has also been cancelled. And other events include, for example, Disney's premiere of Zootopia 2 and their evening light show, as well as Hong Kong's evening light show and some arts festival have all been cancelled. The very major K-pop music awards, Mama Awards, will still take place today and tomorrow at the Kai Tak Sports Park. But the organizer, CJENM, has said that the theme for the music festival would be Support Hong Kong, and they will also make donations close to people affected by the fire, and there will also be a moment of silence to mourn the casualties of the fire. So even for events that are going ahead, the organizers are thinking very proactively, how to provide support and sort of create unity among residents in Hong Kong.
Shirley, thank you. Bringing us those updates there on the outpouring of support we've seen from businesses and also residents in Hong Kong as it deals with the death toll really from one of the worst fire here in decades. But as of this morning at 6 a.m. local time, rising to 94 with 76 injuries as well. So we'll bring more updates on this front as they come to hand. This is Bloomberg.
Right, just a brief look across equity market to start here. So Asia is, let's call it flat. There's really not a lot of movement on price. There's also not a lot of volume. One particular equity market story, though, is in Korea, and you're going to see why in a moment here, where you have the Kosdaq index going completely the opposite way compared to the normal and main benchmark, which is the Kospi index, and not just going the opposite way, and quite substantially that gap between those two things today down to, I won't get into detail, you can read all about it on the Bloomberg today, effectively a push to help incentivize the retail side of things. Right, we're looking at A&H, that's China Vanke, equity markets here. The story, of course, permeates is more in the fixed income space with the Yuan bond and the 2025 December one. And, of course, them approaching two banks and say, maybe not. But, yes, 4 bonds are halted trading after, again, another day of fairly steep drops in prices. Also happening, I think this time yesterday, we were just talking about the Bank of Korea, right? And it did seem from that point in time they left the door open to interest rate cuts, but it seemed based on the statement and the market reaction was that they might be on an extended pause for now. Joining us here in set to talk us through all things rates and the opportunities in this market going into next year, Jason Pang, Asia Fixed Income Portfolio Manager at JPMorgan Asset Management. Good morning, sir.
Morning. Good morning.
What's the outlook for EM rates? Are the bulk of the cuts behind us? Are we halfway through? Are we done? What's the assumption?
So I think the jury is still out, obviously, from a top-down perspective. At the end of the day, the Fed will be easing interest rates to some degree. So that remains the top-down monetary policy expectation. I think what's probably more insightful within EM, and I think this is very pertinent towards the EM Asia part, whereas, we've seen LATAM or other countries cut somewhat materially. Asia cycle has been much more of a prolonged cut, as you know, since 2018 era. So I think premised off of that, it's been quite insightful, at least to me, that we've seen continuing, weaker data in selective countries, still an ongoing tone of, deflationary pressures. But recently, and I think Korea Treasury bonds has been one of those, amongst many others, is that we haven't seen interest rates or government bonds hit new lows. If anything, they've started selling off.
Yeah.
So the symptoms do suggest that there is a degree of maybe overpositioning, a very entrenched view on sort of deflation and everything. And one of the things that we've been looking at, which is very interesting, is if you look at China PPI, even though it's been still in a deflationary mode, it's sort of corrected from a very low base already. It's still negative, but at the same time, when you look at the ASEAN CPI baskets, all of them have actually started rebounding as well. Part of that is base effects, but obviously part of that may also be that if PPI starts going higher or stabilizes from here to net zero, then you might see, in China, which drives a lot of supply chain and the regional inflationary outlook, you might see higher inflation going forward into next year.
You see higher inflation in China specifically into...
China is a bit more tricky, I'd say.
Asia,
ASEAN.
Yeah, it's a function of China PPI.
Yeah.
Right, okay, sorry.
Yes.
I was just thinking, okay, I was surprised by that one. Okay, then out of which currencies then do you prefer or favour then within the Asian EM complex?
Yeah, so if you subscribe to the theory that we are in a phase of potentially bottoming out into next year on interest rates, I do believe that the ASEAN currencies are more interesting for us. So in particular, I do like the Malaysia ringgit as one of the better favored ones on my side. I think Indonesia rupee is very cheap for obvious reasons as well due to the ongoing cuts that they've had. And I think, at least for me, then I've turned somewhat more constructive on the renminbi. So those are the 3 main picks in terms of the currency longs that we like.
Talk to us about the ringgit.
Sure.
Why?
Okay.
Why that pre?
So the ASEAN ones are very interesting, and I think one thing that people have not talked about is sort of this. We talk about semiconductor AI and everything, but no one's talking
we're getting
about
there again.
No one's talking about the hyperinflation for consumers that is coming through. So I'll give you a sort of tangent here to consider: is if your bill of materials has jumped up by 30%, 50%, right? And we all know all the prices of smartphones are increasing, and computers and so on and so forth. ASEAN baskets on average tend to have about 5% in communications or electrical equipment. So when you see that massive jump of 30 to 50%, you will see that start reflecting into the CPI. So I think premised off of that, Malaysia being a classic case, they have a better economic footing already. There's a big data center play there. They get it right, then I do believe Malaysia can be a very lucrative currency investment. Of course, that also means that we are a bit more underweight the interest rates over there in that market.
How does your thinking around the dollar also play into this as well, and where it goes into next year?
So I think the expectation for us remains on a ongoing U.S. interest rate cut. I would acknowledge that financial conditions are quite decent on the U.S. side, but at the same time, if you look at unemployment, there is a pickup there. So I think how do you balance the K-shaped economy is the way that we would see it. But nonetheless, we don't believe, or I certainly don't believe that a K-shaped economy means rate hikes of any sort. So stable interest rates is fine. You get the rate cuts, that's fine. Asian interest rate cycles are bottoming out from a very, very low base over time. So I think that setup still suggests to me that you want an allocation in non-US dollar investments.
One of the other calls you just mentioned, the renminbi, I think we're going to just flash the chart just for our viewers here. Risk reversals are on dollar China 1 year. Negative, I think, for the first time in several years. We've seen an outperformance of the Chinese currency recently. Why do you think that's the case? And is that the same trade that you're
we've been positioned in the renminbi for quite some time already. So I think we changed our views basically, I think, since last quarter. We're going for a more neutral renminbi. Incrementally, we've moved more constructive. Some of this comes from my general view that CNY fixings have continued to defy model estimates. It's continued to come stronger.
Yes.
And I think the thinking that I have over there is, first of all, you have CGBs have not been making new lows. So you have that interest rate dynamic going on. But second of all, I think from a top-down policymaker perspective, and this remains, I guess, preliminary, but my view is that, one-way currency depreciation is not the way to go. It does not produce the constructive results that, I guess policymakers expect or think. So I think premised off of that, we're seeing some very experimental or new ways that the currency is being priced. But nonetheless, then I do believe that over time, we are sort of, bottoming out over there on the Chinese economy as well to some degree. That should produce productive results for the FX as well.
What does it mean then if you see that bottoming out in the economy in terms of your preference or allocation around corporate debt as well?
So I think corporate debt, China property remains immensely difficult. So I don't believe that we've been engaged in that. And I think we've mentioned before, and my view remains the same, is that when you talk about sort of selective sectors, I think the most difficult one from a Sharpe ratio perspective is the China property, right? So, when you buy China prop, you're basically playing GDP reflation. That's your trade. I still stand by the view that we should take it as we've been investing in convertibles in the H-share markets and Hong Kong markets. Multipliers there are still, at least to me, somewhat cheap relative to the rest of the world. So we've been sort of using that as the GDP reflation expression.
Jason, thanks very much for joining us this morning. That was Jason Pang there, Asia Fixed Income Portfolio Manager at JPMorgan Asset Management. And we will leave you this morning with a look at how Asian markets are faring. We are nearly an hour into the session so far for Chinese equities, but you're seeing here that look across Southeast Asia. And again, fairly thin trading volumes, some modest gains for most of the region. This is Bloomberg. You're watching The China Show, and we are taking a look at some of the movers rather this Friday morning here. Look, markets are fairly subdued across the board. You can see the broader index just slightly in the red today, but on the individual names that are standing out, well, Next Chip is one of the biggest gainers in the session so far. This is actually a chip maker that operates in China, but it does make 12-inch wafers, other products as well. So there's some of the biggest gainers, but let's also dive into one of the top red stories, and that's Pulp Mart. We've actually seen this sort of recovery of sorts in this share because it is leading the China consumer rally, and we do actually have the likes of Morgan Stanley saying this valuation offers an attractive entry point. It's 11:29 a.m. in Tokyo. Japanese markets just about to go into their break this morning, and we're seeing equities again trading very steady in the session, continuing to monitor the ongoing fallout really between Japan and China over the comments that the Japanese Prime Minister made about essentially coming to the aid of Taiwan in the event of an invasion from China. So that, of course, is been marching on for the past few weeks. But we do actually have Goldman Sachs out with a note this morning, and they're saying that the rising tensions between Tokyo and Beijing could end up shaving about 0.2 of a percentage point off GDP for Japan. That's if tourism and exports of consumer goods to China continues to decline. So that's the note from Goldman. But in terms of what else we're watching this morning, still keeping an eye on what's happening with JGBs, and that's after we had the inflation numbers from Tokyo earlier today. Of course, that's sort of seen as an early indicator really of where the national inflation heads as well.
Yeah, in fact, let's get more on that and how markets are reacting, or the lack of it, really, when you look at the JGB space. We do have, of course, a 2-year bond auction. Later, in case you're watching out of the U.S., that means Friday here in the Asia Pacific. Or I'll give you a time frame for that, about an hour from now.
Very precise.
Inflation, let's talk about that. Yeah, to Belt's point, steady in November. What does it mean for the BOJ? Are they on track still when you look at interest rate path? Likely so, just looking at where negative rates are, really, and how deeply that situation still remains. Let's get into the details, though, of the print that came out just about, let's call it 3 hours back. Paul Jackson, our economy and government editor, is with us right now to talk us through and break down the data for us. Paul, anything stand out to you, sir?
Well, I think this is really more of the same. The data proved a little bit stronger, a little bit more robust than we thought. So we're around the 2.8% mark. That compares with the national figure, which is around 3%. These are elevated levels for inflation in Japan. And it kind of underlines the point that the economics really points to the need to raise interest rates in Japan. So I think from an economic standpoint, it makes sense for the Bank of Japan to get on with it and raise rates in December. But there's still a lot of debate about whether they will go in December or in January. We've seen some of the advisors to Takaichi, Prime Minister Takaichi, and members of the coalition saying it would be a mixed message to raise interest rates at the same time. You're putting out an economic package to help people in the economy, and so it makes sense to wait for January. So you can argue it both ways, maybe on the economics December and politically January.
And we were just talking with you there, Paul, in the ad break about whether you, as a resident, a long-time resident in Tokyo, are noticing any less tourists on the ground. But even if you're not, Goldman Sachs has got a note out this morning talking about the impact that this spat between Tokyo and Beijing could end up having on Japan's GDP.
The Goldman report suggests about 0.2 percentage point. So, you know, from a political standpoint, you could take that on the chin and stand your ground. It's not going to bring the economy to its knees. So I think the takeaway from that report is, there could be a noticeable hit, but this is not of the kind of scale that would force Takaichi to retract her remarks. I think that's the takeaway from that figure. We have seen slightly larger figures, like 0.3 percentage point out there for the impact. I think one interesting point in the Goldman note was that they said in the scenario where China got into the supplies of rare earths, then we could be talking about more significant impact on the economy. But they didn't calculate that because presumably they still see that option as far off.
That was our Japan and Korea's economy and government editor, Paul Jackson, joining us this morning. And in some other corporate news that we're tracking, Bloomberg's learned that at least 2 major local banks rejected China Vanke's attempt to secure a short-term loan. Sources say Vanke held talks with banks about obtaining a liquidity loan to help repay 2 bonds that are due next month, but the discussions were unsuccessful. The developer is struggling to ease default fears that fueled this week's plunge in its bonds. Taiwanese prosecutors have searched the homes of a former TSMC executive suspected of leaking trade secrets to his new employer, Intel. It signals an escalation in the government's criminal investigation into the high-profile dispute. TSMC has sued Lo Wei-jen, alleging a high likelihood that he shared sensitive information with Intel, something the US company denies. And Alibaba has made a rare foray into hardware, releasing smart glasses powered by its Qwen AI models. The product, called Quark S1, features built-in translucent displays that superimpose contextual information on the user's view of their surroundings. The glasses are equipped with cameras, bone conduction microphones and swappable batteries. They're available now in China, with Alibaba promising international versions next year. And you are seeing, again, a bit of a move high with Alibaba in the session today. Interesting, as we're talking about, it sort of makes that move to monetize different AI streams as well. But when we talk about AI, the key concern that we've really had in markets for a long time now are fears around circular deals, fears around AI bubbles. And earlier on the Tech Show, because we had the latest episode of Bloomberg Tech Asia this morning, we were talking about that very topic, concerns around AI bubble fears. And one of the companies that's most connected to this is Foxconn, of course, in Asia, because we see Foxconn, it's the key supplier or lead supplier of AI service to Oracle, for instance, in the US. Oracle, SoftBank, OpenAI are working on Project Stargate. Now Foxconn has teamed up as well with OpenAI directly. They're going to be working on further infrastructure efforts. So I spoke with the Foxconn chairman, Young Liu, last week, and I asked him this very question. Is he concerned about the AI bubbles, but also the risk that we're seeing some circular deals?
I look at from the user's point of view, the use of the model. Okay, from that angle, as a user for this a large language model for our manufacturer, for our daily uses, we have a great potential for the use of that capabilities. We know that, and it's not just for us; it's for all businesses. They need it, so the demands are there. How to fulfill it, and in what way, in terms of finance, they will figure out a way. As long as there's demands, I think people are concerned about whether the demands are not real.
What about the monetization, though? Because that is also a concern. How can a company like OpenAI, for instance, with such a big spend on infrastructure, get enough revenue to make the financials make sense, essentially? I mean, are you concerned about still joining forces or signing this MOU with a company that's not even yet profitable?
Look at this. They have 800 million users nowadays already. If they can get let's say $100 a year, that's about 80 billion a year.
Yes, if people are prepared to spend that much, I think is the question.
Not 1,000. Okay, so if you calculate per user revenue, that's maybe achievable. And it's up to them, what kind of products that they're going to provide. Okay. So, like they have this, they formed a joint venture with law firm, with Johnny Ive, called I.O., the company called I.O. But they're trying to come up with new edge devices, right? If that comes, something, will happen.
But the fortunes of companies like NVIDIA, OpenAI, Oracle, they're increasingly tied together. Is there any risk of that? If one domino falls, the other one can wobble as well?
If we have to, if we look back in the 2000, about the internet bubble. People call it bubble, right? But if you look at what it is now today, the top, at least 7 of the top 10 high-tech companies in the States, they're all internet companies. I imagine maybe 10 years from now, the top 10 of the high-tech companies in the U.S., they're mostly AI companies. That's a huge valuation, right, for those companies. And the investment for that, I don't think it's too much.
That was the Foxconn chairman, Yang Lu, there. And we'll leave you with a look at how markets are faring this morning. As we said, heading through the morning session, we're seeing a little bit of modest downside, but again, very thin liquidity in the session so far. The Hang Seng off 0.2%. More ahead.
Right, welcome back. You're watching the China Show. We're gearing up for earnings out of Meituan. We're down about, let's call it a fifth of 1%. Still above 100, but yet still at about 100, which is obviously one of the main issues here. I mean, the peer group is of Meituan itself, as we go into the earnings, is fairly tricky, right? So obviously you have the big China comparisons, but if you look across outside China, you have like DoorDash, for example, maybe Uber. And in terms of just within the Chinese tech complex, 5 being the most bullish on the consensus rating. So that's, if you get a 5, that effectively means you have almost 0 hold and sell ratings. 1 is the opposite. Meituan is still clearly on the bullish side of things, but not as bullish as when you compare that to its peers in China, which obviously is the same analyst universe. That's just to say, compared to the other two, people are less bullish on the stock itself. Right, going into earnings today, it's going to be interesting, and shout out to Anthony Stephens, of course, our markets producer, for pointing this out, right? If you do get, it's a big if, right? If you do get the market reacting on the negative side of things, and we do see, based on implieds right now, that could be a 5% drop, it actually takes you past the 100 Hong Kong dollar pain point, which is, if you take the stock all the way back a couple of years, that's actually a level, yes, it's traded below that, but actually a level that's held up. It's a nice whole round number. It's also, we have a lot of options expiries. It's effectively the pain trade if we do see that fall below. That will depend, of course, on the earnings that are coming through later today. That is also to say there is some momentum in shares. We had, of course, if you remember, we had that report coming out of Baba. And on that day, the day after that, it was actually Meituan that started pushing higher on price. A massive move into options contracts yesterday. So call options. In terms of the volume, 3 times the 20-day average, and about 125,000 contracts as of yesterday is the highest since August. So a lot of bullish calls here, Bell, going into this earnings report, and hopefully that does deliver. And of course, these guys go in the money as far as that's concerned. Bell.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Dave, I think, just in terms of the moves we've seen this week, because, I mean, I'm not going to call it 10%, but you're not too far off an upside move or appreciation of 10% in the stock so far this week, which is very curious, given that you've seen that real pain from the food price delivery wars and quick commerce playing out in Alibaba's numbers, JD as well. But let's get more with that Bloomberg Intelligence senior analyst, Catherine Lim, who joins us from Singapore. So Catherine, thanks very much for your time. What are you going to be watching for in the numbers later today, and especially, I guess, the guidance as well?
Yeah, so, the numbers, Annabelle, we know it's going to be the first loss that the company will be reporting, particularly for their core local commerce, which is essentially, the delivery side of things itself. So really, it's about the forward guidance, and would they be saying the same as what Alibaba said, that, the investments into this business has peaked, and now they are looking to actually rein in some of the expenses, etc. And we probably will see the losses narrowing. If not, we might actually see the business turning profitable again. So really, that's the question that I'm looking for answers for later this evening.
And Catherine, once we do get this result, and to your point, we will likely see its first loss. I think another question I have is this going to be the first loss of many? But I think we can talk about that next time. But when we do see these numbers, do you think that's a good approximation of the the health of the Chinese consumer and online spending, or do I have to look at another company for a better gauge of that?
Yeah, that's a great question because, essentially the companies are losing profits. They are going into losses because they have thrown in a lot to try to stimulate the consumption, which at the end of the day, it isn't the most robust right now. And going into 2026, the real question right now is, as they rein in back on some of these perks and incentives, are we going to see the same kind of revenue growth for these businesses? And rather, the consumption, overall environment itself, concerns about income growth, the outlook ahead. Coming back from Beijing, I don't really think that has actually changed a lot. Rather, shoppers are definitely still more discerning as they step into the new year.
Catherine, as always, fantastic insights going into this earnings report and what it could tell us, of course, broadly around the consumer. Catherine Lim, our senior analyst, Bloomberg Intelligence in Singapore for us this morning. A brief look at publishing-related stocks, media stocks, you can call them that. There's this, the State Council released this draft rule, to be more specific here, to promote reading and encourage the development of applications of new technologies, platforms, and facilities that promote reading. Nationwide market is reacting to that. A lot of these big names, of course, are moving. In some cases, 14%, double digits. Right. One other thing to track, you're looking at the overnight HIBOR rate, Hong Kong dollar. Obviously, it doesn't trade intraday. We will get a fixing, though, in about 20 or so minutes from now. The reason we underscored this today was yesterday we actually saw a sizable move up. And as you can see, I think it was the biggest move on a day-to-day basis in about 2 years or so. Just track this closely. Is it month end or is it something else? I'll leave you with a look at that, and we'll take a short break. We'll be back shortly.
Well, the search for answers has begun in Hong Kong after at least 94 people were killed in the worst fire the city has seen in decades. Hong Kong Legislative Council member Regina says it's too early to pass judgment on any government officials or companies involved. The New People's Party chair spoke to us earlier today.
The question is, with such a multi-story building management, can you really rely on owners working as unpaid volunteers to supervise the works? So I think the government need to do more to help the residents. And as your people reported, Labour Department already found some of the materials were not compliant with government standards. And it is really sad that the bamboo scaffolding coupled with the non-fire retardant mesh netting and the dry weather and the windy weather caused the fire to spread so quickly and led to such colossal loss of life and property. It's really sad.
Yeah, we should reiterate as well that the investigations into the construction company that you mentioned are ongoing, and obviously we haven't got to the exact bottom of what went wrong, and also this question over which materials were used and whether they were contravening safety standards. But Regina, I mean, you are someone, as a former Secretary for Security, have been in this government position before that Chris Tung now finds himself in today. Do you think that there needs to be any government officials that are also held accountable for what's happened?
I think, again, it's premature to pass judgment on any officials or even on any companies involved. But I think government should take a good look at our existing legislation, whether there are gaps in the requirements about fire retardant materials, not only for construction but also for smaller scale renovations, and to step up the enforcement. I think this should be part of the overall review and investigation to be conducted by government.
What about potential changes to the things like the awarding of contracts, for example? Is that something that you think LegCo should be looking at as well? And should we expect changes there?
There have always been complaints about awarding of contracts because there's a lot of competition for these lucrative works, So the Urban Renewal Authority already providing a service to the owners. They can contract the URA and they will help you assess the value of the contract when you do the tendering. I think this has been done in many instances but still it's a hot area of contention between owners and between competitors for the jobs.
The Hong Kong Chief Executive John Lee visited the site yesterday, and he did announce that $10,000 Hong Kong dollars, that's around $1,300 US, will be handed out to each family that's been affected. Do you think that's sufficient?
There's just immediate relief, clearly insufficient. These people have lost their homes and properties, and some of them will move to a hotel soon. But currently, the government is offering accommodation in transitional housing, temporary housing in faraway areas, far away from their homes. So they have a lot of adjustment to do, whether for work or for schooling for the children. So the government set up a fund, fundraising. The government contributed 300 million Hong Kong dollars toward a fund for long-term relief for the Wang Fuk Court residents. And I think the latest is we already received 800 million Hong Kong dollars donations from the community. I think more money will be flooding in, including from American corporations and the American Chamber, for which we are grateful.
We're days away now, though, from the heavily promoted legislative elections.
Yes.
Do you think that there's case for those to be postponed? Is that the appropriate response, do you think?
I think there are legal limitations, both from local law and the basic law. I'm sure it's under consideration by the government, and we are waiting to hear from the government. Currently, all political parties have suspended our campaigning activities, and our people are on the ground to help the victims.
Regina. That was the Hong Kong LegCo member Regina Ip speaking with us earlier this morning, and we're taking you to some live pictures here. This is a market that's become a distribution centre for supplies, and we understand this is just a couple of blocks away from where this fire happened at the building or building complex in Tai Po. And I think that's really one of the most remarkable features of this as well. It's just been that huge outpouring of support you've seen from everyday citizens, but also businesses across the city as well.
We've seen staggering amounts of financial support being pledged from the government, from foundations, from private sector, and I think Regina Ip, we just spoke to her earlier, we played a tape. We've heard a lot from the Chinese corporate, and she does expect also to get the same amounts from some of the other multinationals, including the American firms. As, of course, we are just about to wrap up what's been a very, very, very tragic week here in the city, but this live picture does give you a reminder that not to lose hope in humanity and our ability to respond to things like this. That's it from us here on The China Show. We'll see you all on Monday.